You're listening to the StatsBomb Football Podcast.
One half a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us.
Hello and welcome back to the StatsBomb Football Podcast. We are so excited, guys. We have a special guest joining us today, as always, joined by Matt Edwards and Shane Regal. Today, I am joined by Carmen Vitali, formerly of the Dodgers, the White Sox, Arizona State, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You can now find her and all of her amazing insights on Fox Sports, covering the NFC North, along with the rest of the NFL. Fox Sports Radio, your nationally broadcast show. We'll make sure we get a lot of plugins for you. And then, of course, your time joining Mina Kimes and Joy on ESPN. We love getting to see you on those. Carmen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. That was quite the introduction, but hopefully I live up to it.
Well, we are here for the NFL season preview, and so we are excited to have you on because you are going to be our NFL expert to lean on and dig in with. Now, I learned my lesson, Carmen, last week. I buried the lead on the Baja Blast of the week, and I got roasted by our listeners. And we're going to put the Baja Blast of the week with America's most loved Mountain Dew related weekly news segment. Matt Edwards, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. And so, Carmen, I don't know if you know, but we have we call it the Baja Blast of the week, but it's just a like random weird pairing of things. So today's pairing is McDonald's is releasing a Big Mac, but with chicken that is coming to America. Apparently it's been overseas for a couple of years and it is coming to America very soon. And I am very excited for it. I previously have, if you go overseas to McDonald's, they have all sorts of interesting varieties. My favorite of which is I got a McFalafel in the Middle East a couple of years ago, and it was very good.
Yeah, of all the things that they could bring here from their international menus, that's what it sounds fine, but it also just sounds like a chicken sandwich. It's not anything too exciting. I used to live down the street in Chicago from the McDonald's that serves a bunch of the international items from different menus, and it's changing all the time. But my favorite is still the chicken sandwich. It is a chicken sandwich actually, but it has a fried mozzarella piece on top of it and a tomato sauce, and so it's from Italy. I forgot what it was called, but it was like the McParmesan or something like that.
I was just going to say a McParm, like that.
Like a McParm. It was so good, and I was sad when that went away. But cool.
This is a perfect jumping off point. If we're going to talk about a chicken sandwich, I'm not going to let an episode go by without a promo for my friend Joe and Roost Chicken and Biscuits here in the city of Chicago. Carmen, I know you've been. Joe does an amazing job with his chicken. And so if we're going to talk a chicken sandwich, we're talking a chicken sandwich. Let's jump to a quick week 0 review. And the coolest thing you saw last weekend. Carmen, I want to turn to you. I know that you're an NFL expert. What was the coolest thing you saw last weekend with our week 0 in football?
I mean, is it too cliche to just say Georgia Tech the upset? That was fantastic, and it just reminds us how also I think overseas games you just never know what are going to happen, what's going to happen. So being in Dublin, and it's like being in an airport where time doesn't matter and you don't follow the conventions of society. I feel like overseas football games are the same way, and so I was really excited to see Georgia Tech pull that off.
A couple of years ago, Northwestern even won a game. They had to go overseas to do it, but they did
against Nebraska.
I will take it every time. This is 2 weeks in a row we get to talk about Northwestern's singular win that year, and I will hold that up for the rest of my life. Shane, the coolest thing you saw last weekend?
Yeah, for me, it was seeing 2 swinging gate plays. So Florida State ran a swinging gate for a 2-point conversion, and then North Alabama also ran it for a 2-point conversion. And both were successful. So I wanted to toss it to Matt to see if you had any fun stories about implementing any trick plays as your time as a coach.
So one day I was scrolling Twitter, and the University of Michigan opened up a plethora of old historical game footage. While I was watching, just randomly perusing a game, they did this wing tee double handoff pitch back to the quarterback, and we ended up putting it into our game plan, and we had it as like our 2-point play or goal line play. We didn't actually end up calling it, but the first time we ran it, we ended up I think we handed it to the tight end who eventually pitched it back out. So like our 6'8", 270 Jelani Woods pitching it back to the quarterback. Like, it was a lot of fun to watch, and just the trick plays, you never know exactly who's going to touch the ball. So it's a lot of fun. So I get that.
That's amazing. I'm sure Broncos still got it in the repertoire, though, down in New Mexico. I'm sure you've just blown up next week's trick play, 3rd and 1 on the goal line. Here we go.
Hopefully not, but yeah.
One correction, I did call out last week that I would hit it. It is UTSA, I mentioned. They are playing all 4 Owls teams this year. They're playing Temple, they are playing FAU, they're playing Rice, and all 4 Owls teams. So apologies, I missed that at the end of last week. Jumping to the NFL, Carmen, I want to spin right to you. We covered a lot of conference realignment this year. No such luck. There's a lot of creative ideas out there that say that the Cowboys just shouldn't be in the NFC East because it still doesn't make any sense to anybody, including myself. What do you see as the biggest changes coming this year within the NFL?
I mean, it's definitely not structurally obvious. Like the NFL is going to ride with this until they expand, and I don't know when that would even be coming. They're more focused on expanding the schedule for games perspective. I think we're not too far away from an 18-game season. There's just no way that they're going to pass up making more money. But obviously, it's the kickoff rules. That's the biggest change to the NFL. It looks pretty weird. We got our first look at what it looks like in preseason. I don't think we've seen even 10% of how teams are actually going to play this and the strategy behind it in the preseason, because I don't think any of these coaches want to show their hands quite yet. But it's definitely reinvigorated from some of the special teams coordinators I've talked to. It's like reinvigorated their side of the ball. And there's always been 3 phases to the ball, and special teams just kind of goes by the wayside. So I think this is going to be interesting with not only the strategy on the field, but then roster construction and who actually gets to hang on and who you use in those situations. Do you still use like your fastest guys, but sometimes your fastest guys are your starters? Do you still like risk that? It's going to be very interesting to see how this all unfolds. And the NFL did it to promote kickoff returns, and I appreciate that because they're fun.
I love it. I love it. We just said one of Matt's trigger words, which is special teams. So, Matt, I'm going to let you jump in just a second here. But I was just debating with my own father the other night who had the old man take of, I hate this change. Where's the kickoffs? Let me see the touchdowns. Like, I think they're coming. I think they're coming. As soon as they start dropping the ball into the landing zone, you're going to be forced to return this ball. Matt, you love special teams. You love getting to do special teams, special projects for the teams that we work with here at StatsBomb. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting addition to the game. I think as Carmen, you were talking about it, we had kickoff returns for a long time, and then they sort of had disappeared for the past couple of seasons. And so, one of the things that we do with our collection is we collect our events around the tracking data. So for every kickoff, we know exactly where it landed and how much hang time it had and who's returning it and who's making the tackles. And there's just so much data that is there that can help these teams as they're creating new game plans. And I heard somebody was talking about it where, you can almost no longer think of it as a special teams play. It's almost an offensive play. Yeah. And so, the variety that happens in offensive scheme, I think we'll start to see that level of creativity and variety come to the kickoff returns. So, whether it's who you put back there, Carmen, like you're talking about, right, of who's the personnel that you're going to put on those teams. Is it going to be your, fast receivers? Is it going to be more of a running back type that you're going to run plays that are going to be, similar to like an outside zone type thing? It's really interesting to watch as that develops over this year and, in the next couple of seasons.
I'd love to see a handed off reverse of some kind take place in the landing zone. That feels to me like the ultimate outcome that we can hope for. As we think about big changes, Shane, I want to go to you first on this one. Biggest retirements of the NFL. We've got a bunch of them. I can list a few off, but what's your biggest retirement heading into this season?
Yeah, well, being based in Pittsburgh, it's got to be Aaron Donald for me. One of my favorite players to watch, even when he was at Pitt. Probably my favorite Pitt play ever is Aaron Donald splitting the center guard and tackling the running back and the quarterback at the same time. So I would be sad to see him go.
I love that. It's a great call out. I think we were fortunate enough to be on with the Rams actually the day that he announced his retirement, and there were a number of eyebrows raised in that conversation. Matt, I know you were there, and I felt like the arbiter of that one, and felt terrible.
I know. I remember one of them finally was just like, "Oh, did that finally get announced?" Like they've known for a little bit, and it was sad to see some huge names. Jason Kelsey, I know another one who's a fan favorite that will be gone. But I think for me, it's almost more so the coaches that won't be there. I mean, Carmen, having covered the NFL for the last little bit, like, can you imagine a year without Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll? Like, it's going to be crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially defensively between Aaron Donald being out of the league now and Bill Belichick being out of the league. And yeah, to some extent, even Pete Carroll, just given what he was able to build in Seattle, there feels like a shift defensively. And I think it also kind of coincides with this newer, faster spread offense passing league that we're seeing where, you think of Belichick, you think of physicality, and you think of just like really hard hits and all that other stuff. A lot of those hits are being taken out just from rule changes. And then on top of that, you're having to contend with faster and lighter players and kind of retool schemes. And so I think we're seeing kind of this defensive reckoning, and that's being reflected in kind of the old guard of some of these guys being out of the league coaching wise. Aaron Donald has just been one of my favorite players forever, because I really do think that he just completely changed so much about this league and instilled so much fear in opponents. I have to give a shout out though to a really dear friend of mine who also retired from the league this year, which is Ryan Jensen, center for the Buccaneers. Super Bowl champion, Pro Bowl center, played in the league for quite a while, and his ascension from basically a walk-on, although it was like in Baltimore, to rising up their ranks, starting for them, getting a free agent contract in Tampa, which is where I met him, and then ascending from there into one of the best centers in the league. I talked to the Bucks contracts guy, basically he's the VP of football administration, about it, because they had just awarded him a contract before he got injured and didn't really see the full realization of the money that they spent on him the second time around.
Yeah.
But the VP of football admin was like, you know what? That's fine. He did everything and more we could have ever asked for him. I'm happy to let him have that money and go off into retirement, build his barn in Colorado, and enjoy life out there with his kids.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It's so nice. It's, we hear a lot of the stories of, some of the players that they finish their career either with retirement or an injury, and they're always, we obviously just came off of CeeDee Lamb getting a big new contract here this week. And, you don't hear some of those behind the scenes stories of, hang on a second, this guy paid his dues, and he bashed his face, into guys like Aaron Donald. Literally. For a decade to help us win football games, and in doing so, let's set him off into the sunset the right way. We don't hear enough of those. Were there any surprises for the two of you, or the three of you, I should say, in retirements or new coaching moves? I know obviously Kellen Moore in Philly, Kingsbury in Washington. What are your thoughts on some of the surprising moves that happened this year?
I think obviously we touched on it a little bit with Belichick and Pete Carroll not being in the league. It's been a long time since we have had, either of them not in the NFL. But to me, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a surprise, but glad that it finally happened and we don't have to hear about Jim Harbaugh. Is he going to leave for the NFL? So I'm really intrigued to see if he can, he's had a run of just incredible success from, taking over the 49ers, Stanford, San Diego, University of San Diego.
University of San Diego, USD, that's right up on the hill there.
And then obviously, culminating in the national championship for Michigan last year. But to see if he can keep that up, the Harbaugh brothers, we're going to get a million stories about them, I'm sure. So we definitely will not be hearing less of Jim Harbaugh, but excited to see him move on into the NFL so we don't have to hear that persistent rumor anymore.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a good call. Carmen, any surprises for you?
Yeah, I don't know that this was necessarily surprises. I think it was more along the lines of guys that did well this year that had just gotten there. Like guys like Shane Steichen come to mind. Obviously, you look at D'Amico Ryans, what he was able to do in Houston. There were things that I got surprised at from previous hires. I think that, the league is good for a quarter changeover in coaching staffs pretty much every year. So that was kind of to be expected outside of the Pete Carroll. I was surprised at Pete Carroll too, but I'm really excited that Mike McDonald got that job because I think that that's going to be phenomenal for Seattle.
Yeah, I love that call out. That's a really good one. And I think, we talk coaches. We're not going to play hot seat, cool throne. Carmen, we'll let you do that when you're on ESPN and your time there. But I'll spin on a quick one. Who do you think is going to get a second year bump as a coach? We've got a number of new coaches that you mentioned stepping in last year. Who do you think is going to get a second year bump this year, coming off of kind of that settling in process and then finally understanding their teams?
Yeah, I think Shane Steichen is the one that comes to mind perfectly, just because I think the Colts are being completely slept on, and I get it. They're in the AFC South. But because they're in the AFC South, I think that their path to having some success is probably a little bit easier than most outside of, obviously, the Texans. But I do really like Shane Steichen, what he was able to do and how much he was able to turn them around. And now, if Anthony Richardson is who you think he is, I just think that the Colts and Steichen in particular is going to know exactly what to do with him. I'm really, really interested to see how this is all going to go with them in particular. And then obviously D'Amico Ryans, can you continue the momentum you started last year? I mean, both of those guys are just phenomenal. And we're pretty surprising. And we'll see what Jonathan Gannon can do in Arizona. That's going to be very interesting getting Kyler Murray back. So
I was going to say you hit me with a Denny Greenism. So if they are who we thought they were, and Jonathan Gannon can take the Cardinals to the next level. Shane, I'll pivot to you on this one because we've talked to a bunch of coaches, and you obviously have some great theories about coaches who wear visors that we can get into at a different point on call out their win-loss record. I'll tease the listeners with that one for a couple weeks down the line. But who do you think's on a coaching second year bump?
Yeah, I think Carmen hit both of the two that I would be looking at. I'm a little skeptical of Anthony Richardson, so I wonder about the Colts. But yeah, I mean the Texans, the way they just sort of took over the division, it feels like in the South. I'm definitely going to be watching them again this season. Let's
get into our conferences. Carmen, we're going to start in the NFC, and I want to start in the NFC North because it's nearest and dearest to my heart and your heart. Let's cover the NFC North. What the heck is going on? What should we expect out of the Bears? What's going on with Caleb? What should we expect with a brand new contract in Green Bay? Where are we going?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to the Chicago Bears, you need to separate expectations from hopes. I hope.
How do we do that? I live in Chicago. How do we do that?
Everybody has all of these, Super Bowl division hopes. I just don't want that to be the expectation for a rookie coming in as good as Caleb Williams has looked in the preseason, as highly touted as he was coming out of USC. I really want to make sure that we're not putting too many expectations on the Bears right away, just given the fact that they have a new offensive system under Shane Waldron. This is drastically different than what they were running before. You have to give guys time to gel. You have a ton of new weapons too, on top of having that rookie quarterback. So you just need to give that side of the ball time to kind of gel. And I wouldn't be surprised if it only takes a half a season, but at that point, I don't want to assign success to the Chicago Bears based on if they make the playoffs or, if they have a double-digit win record or anything like that. I think you just need to see, all right, does this look like it's going to work? And that's a lot less tangible. And therefore, it kind of breeds all of these crazy expectations. But having those expectations when you share a division with the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions, who went to the playoffs last year, Green Bay is the youngest team in the league with a first-year starter. Those teams are not done ascending. And that's the Lions. They addressed probably the only weakness they really had, which was in their secondary. They couldn't keep guys healthy. They now overloaded the secondary. Both of their first two picks were cornerbacks. They also traded for Carlton Davis. So now you are going to field a full secondary come hell or high water in Detroit. And that was about your only question mark when it came to this team, outside of maybe who's on the other side of Aiden Hutchinson. But if all of the levels of the defense are working together, it's not really going to matter. And the fact that the offense is so capable of scoring so many points, and I just think that they're continuing to ascend. They're going to be the team to beat in this division. I think the Green Bay Packers have a really good case to do that too, depending on how their defense does under Jeff Hafley, who's their new D coordinator. But that's where it kind of the Chicago Bears kind of have a roadblock. And I also don't think the Minnesota Vikings are going to be an easy out. I mean, the injury to JJ was awful.
Big one to start the year.
But I don't think it changes much for the Minnesota Vikings because I think that Sam Darnold was always going to have a really long leash because you wanted to make sure that JJ was developing. And you didn't pay Sam Darnold $10 million to not start some significant amount of games for you. So I don't think that with all of the offensive talent they have in Minnesota, on top of the third year under Brian Flores on defense, and now he has potentially two double-digit pass rushers on either side of that defensive line in Dallas Turner, now their rookie, on top of Jonathan Grenard. I just don't think they're going to be an easy out either. So there's no division games in this division that are gimmies. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it all shakes out because I think this could be one of the best divisions in football. So
I'm going to call it out now because I'm already seeing so many smiles on Matt's face. I know everybody is listening to this as just a pure audio format, but getting to see the smile on Matt's face when we get to just talk pure scheme and pure ball, it lights up the rest of the room. And so, Carmen, you are welcome back every day. You're going to be our first recurring guest. Matt, takes on the rest of the NFC North. I mean, obviously, we love Dan Campbell. We love what's going on there. I've got my old D-line coach, the new D coordinator with Chicago, Eric Washington. I'm excited to have him here. Matt, what's your take?
Yeah, as I was getting ready for this, and as you were talking, Carmen, I feel like this is probably a sneaky division that people aren't necessarily ready for the level of play across the whole division. Obviously, there's every time that a team gets a number one quarterback, there's excitement. They also are on Hard Knocks, which builds excitement as well. So everyone's pumped on the Bears. And they did make quite a few moves recently. And so excited about that. For me, I'm excited to see the Packers and how Jordan Love continues to develop with that young core of receivers. They were able to step up huge last year. And I was really surprised at how well that group played. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, they have a young group of really good receivers, young quarterback. And if they can continue the direction that they were headed last year, I mean, again, the Lions are obviously the team to beat in the division, but the Packers are going to be good. The Vikings, Carmen, like you were talking about, I expect them to continue to be really successful. Losing Cousins, I don't think is going to be that big of a deal for them. Obviously he was hurt last year and they were able to still be successful with, 3 or 4 different people playing quarterback for him. So excited for each of these games is going to be really competitive, I think.
Yeah, I think the Vikings as well as the Cardinals got the Josh Dobbs bump. So last year that was always a fun one. Shane, any takes on the NFC North before we jump to the East and I think a pretty interesting conference to dig into over there?
Yeah, so Matt's the offensive guy on the podcast. I'm the defensive guy. And Carmen, you mentioned the guy I'm interested in watching this year in Hafley for the Packers. What does it look like making that jump from Boston College, where he didn't have a ton of success there? Now that's a hard job to win at, with recruiting in that territory. But it'll be interesting to see how a coach makes that jump in his first year from, not successful college coach to NFL defensive coordinator. So I'm interested to see how that transition goes.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's absolutely a tough one. I think it's, you see some of these coaches and you understand, the life that some of these guys lead. They make the move to the NFL. The schedule is just as much of a grind, but you take out the recruiting aspect and it changes the way they're able to focus on the game, the way they're able to scheme with their players, the amount of time they're able to spend with them. I always wonder if there's a bump just to see within that and what they're capable of putting on film. Let's jump to the East because I know we've got a ton to cover. Carmen, where's the East gonna shake out? I mean, we've got the Giants investing and not investing. We've got the Eagles, their loss of Jason Kelce. We've got the former Washington football team, the Commanders, obviously making some huge structural changes. And then, of course, Jerry's World down in Dallas. What's going on?
I think the Eagles are probably still the favorites to win the division, but I think that margin is pretty slim, and it really hinges on if the coordinators that Nick Sirianni finally got in there, these are his guys. If this doesn't work, I mean, Nick Sirianni does not call plays. He has Kellen Moore, who is from a division team, by the way, and Vic Fangio, who's defense has permeated the league, for multiple teams at this point.
Mm-hmm.
This has to work because Nick Sirianni is a CEO coach. This is his only job, is to make sure that this all keeps running. And there were talks about, like, even after this past season, the way that the Eagles kind of collapsed down the stretch, should Sirianni continue to lead this team? So now you have that in the back of your head. Plus, Philly's just a tough market, man. They don't have patience. That's why you go out and get Saquon Barkley. That's why you try to retool and reload as much as possible. I do think, though, that Jason Kelce loss is not being talked about enough.
Yep,
because
I agree.
What is their most famous play? Like the Eagles' most famous play at this point? It's the tush push.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? That tush push had as much, if not more, to do with Jason Kelce as it did with Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And Jalen Hurts is a bigger body. It makes it easier for him to run those kinds of plays, but that doesn't happen as well as it does if it's not Jason Kelce burying himself. I know, Tanner, you know this, burying himself in the defensive line and making room for Jalen to get there. So I think that's not being talked about enough, but you have two really great tackles on that line still.
Yes.
And I trust Howie Roseman to continue to invest in the trenches.
Always.
So I think that should be okay. I don't know what the Giants are doing. You got rid of Saquon, but you drafted Malik Neighbors. I am probably a little bit more skeptical than most about Malik Neighbors, not from a talent perspective, but just because of some of the things I've heard from scout friends of mine that scouted him at LSU. And, there's been some stuff that's gotten swept under the rug, and as it does at every big time college program. He did have a gun charge at one point that nothing really came of, but I'm just a little concerned with being in that market and having to manage being a pro now. Is that transition going to be hard or easy for Malik Neighbors? I hope it's easier than not, because they really need him to step up, and he's a phenomenal talent. But we're going to see. The Cowboys are the Cowboys. I personally have been campaigning for Dak Prescott to hit free agency after this season. I think at this point, because the deal's not done, I think that's probably where he's leaning too. Doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to be a Cowboy next year, but their teams are going to be lining up to pay that man a contract that has a 6 in front of it every year. Yeah. And I don't know how and he has a no tag, no trade clause on top of this. So all of the cards are in Dak Prescott's deck. And if you're the Cowboys, you have absolutely zero leverage. You could offer Dak whatever, your top of the top. You could offer him $60 million a year, and Dak could say, you know what, I want to see what other teams have to offer. So I don't know what to make of the Cowboys. I think the CD contract maybe helps, because now you're going to have him around for a long term. But you also have Micah Parsons you have to pay down the stretch. And these are all, by the way, problems of Dallas's own making. So you didn't have to pay all these guys this close together if you were just a little bit more proactive about everything. But
you bring up Dak and Matt, I want to pivot to you in just a second, but you bring up Dak, and I can't remember where I was seeing this, but just in the last week, they were showing Dak Prescott's numbers over the last 5 years against a to-be-named quarterback, and it was in-season yards, completions, touchdowns, interceptions, and wins, and they had a group going around guessing, and the to-be-named mystery quarterback was Pat Mahomes. The only difference is those postseason wins, and does a different cast of characters around Dak and a better offensive line lead to more playoff wins? How do we figure this out? The only way to do that is get him onto the trade market. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts, and obviously we're going to come back to the Commanders because there's so much change going on there. Matt, we talked a little bit earlier today, and Carmen, you mentioned this in the Eagles coordinators about at the opposite ends of the age spectrum here in terms of coordinators at this point, right? With Kellen Moore and Fangio. So what's going on in Philly, Matt?
Yeah, I was baffled by the desire to sign Saquon Barkley. He's obviously very successful, incredible player. A side note, my friend is an orthopedic surgeon, and he was doing his residency in New York and got to work on Saquon Barkley as part of his training. He said his thighs are just gigantic. You can see it on TV and you're like, yeah, he looks really big. He's like, it was as big as my waist. Is crazy. anyway, Shane is a big Penn State guy, so he's high on the Saquon Barkley train. But I thought that was really interesting. I have been a big fan of Kellen Moore for a while, and just his offensive scheme and the schematics that he uses, the ability to, I think he gets a lot of credit for pulling some ideas and things from his time at Boise State when they were, pretty creative and clever in what they were doing. While also having a really good understanding of the NFL game and where things are at. I think that he can be pretty creative with the skill set and the personnel that they have in Philly. So really excited to watch that. Thought it was really funny. I think it was the first time that the Eagles ran the tush push in the preseason, but they didn't get it. And I thought, there it is. We've seen the death of the tush push as we know it.
Oh man, let's take a quick pivot. I know we never have enough time to cover as many teams as we want. We'll come back to the Commanders because I think Carmen, there's so much to cover there, and obviously I think again the Eagles will continue to dominate within that division. Shane, I'm going to start with you on the NFC South. What's going on over there? Obviously, a lot of news coming out around the draft and some of the reactions thereof within the NFC South. A bunch of changes. We've seen changes front office, back office. What's going on in the NFC South?
I don't know. I never seem to know what's going on in the NFC South. So I guess in that respect, it's pretty much par for the course for that division. It's a division that you see teams bounce up quick, they win, and then they fall back down. So in that respect, like I said, I think it's pretty normal there. I don't think the Panthers are going to make a push, but I think the other three teams could all conceivably win the division. Obviously, you have, Kirk Cousins going down to Atlanta, and then, their draft choice, maybe they're the favorite now, but it's like most years, it's the one where anyone could win it.
Yep.
I think.
Sorry, go for it, Matt. I was going to say I love an iced out Kirk Cousins thought just crossed my head, but we'll stay on football.
No, I'm most excited to see this is no longer a real actual football a little bit, but to see how overdrafted Taysom Hill gets in fantasy football for a flex hybrid fullback type thing.
Your boy.
As somebody who was at BYU while he was there, and happy to see him and Jamal Williams share the backfield, to former BYU Cougars that played at the same time. And if we have any Texas fans listening, they're just cringing. And sorry, Faison, who works at our company, as a Texas fan. But I think it is really interesting. We talked about the North potentially being the best. I have worries that the South might be one of the worst conferences in the NFL, or divisions in the NFL this year. The Panthers obviously had their struggles last year with the new quarterback. I think that we could see a pretty good second-year bump from Bryce Young this year. I think that his level of play, high school, college, he's not as bad as he played last season. And so I'm really interested to see how the Panthers can grow in year two with him. And I think just everybody's still shaking their heads about the Falcons and their draft choices.
Yeah, Carmen, before I spin you, I think Matt's an interesting one on the Panthers. I mentioned a number of front and back office changes. We've seen a lot of really interesting moves they're making, and adaptations and growth that they're taking on the analytics side, and I think some really interesting pieces there. But Carmen, does did the Bucs bring it home this year? What's going on? Your former team, what's going on?
My former team, they've won the division in the last 3 years, and they've been able to sustain the loss of Tom Brady, which I think is going a little bit unnoticed. But then again, that's nothing new for the Bucs. I do actually think that the Falcons, I wasn't sold on just the Kirk Cousins and then spending your first round pick on Michael Penix Jr. and not helping this team right now. I didn't know what to make of that, and I didn't necessarily think that propelled the Falcons to the top of the rankings in the NFC South even without helping the defense more. But then you went and you traded for Matthew Judon. That actually moved the needle for me more than anything else with the Falcons, where I'm like, okay, I think this is going to be quite a competition between, I think it's going to be between the Bucks and the Falcons. You never can count out the Saints, but I don't know if you guys heard too, like Dennis Allen said that he had thought about Taysom Hill at linebacker also, but I hope that was just a throwaway comment.
Honestly, Taysom Hill can play any position.
Any
I will
position.
stand on the table for that. Center, guard.
We're gonna model it out.
Tackle.
We'll model it out, and we'll get the actual tracking data on a modeled out version of Taysom Hill.
Taysom Hill at linebacker.
It'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, like Dennis Allen is coaching for his job down in New Orleans, and he knows that. I am really concerned still about the Panthers, just given the fact that they basically inherited the Bucs run game from the last few years, which was not very imaginative. And they did make some improvements along the offensive line. I understand that, but you kind of need to get creative when you have a rookie quarterback who has struggled. He's not rookie anymore, but like young quarterback that has struggled. And I feel like you want to give him as much chance to lean on the run game as possible. And that just hasn't been the case when you see the staff that followed Dave Canales to Carolina. It's the run game coordinator. It's the offensive line coach. So you're going to see what you saw in Tampa, which had them, by the way, at 32nd in the league as far as rushing offense went last year. Now in Carolina, and I don't think it's the best idea to not give Bryce Young a balanced offense where you're going to rely on his arm and his talent yet again to get this going. And without enough pieces around him, it's going to be very, very interesting. I'm still very concerned about the Panthers, and also because their ownership seems to have a trigger happy swiping of the pen in pink slips. Like they just, I don't know what the analogy really is there. I don't trust David Tepper to have any sort of patience is what I'm trying to say. And that could not work out for Dave Canales.
We'll see how that one plays out. Let's pivot to the West quickly to round up the NFC, as I know we've got a ton to cover with the AFC. The 49ers going to win the NFC West again? Yes, no? Is this a toss-up? Where are the Rams going to finish? Cardinals going to be last the NFC West again? Carmen, help me out here. Please tell me my Cardinals aren't going to be last again.
No, I think the NFC West is going to be a sneaky good division. I don't think we're like talking enough about the Rams, first of all. And sorry, it's not your Cardinals. I need to see more of what this Cardinals team looks like with Kyler Murray healthy before I can really evaluate it. I think like it looks on paper like they could make some noise and be a little feisty. I don't know if that doesn't mean to me contending with the Niners, but at least that like getting out of the cellar, sure. But I also don't think Seattle's going to be anything to snuff at with Mike McDonald at the helm and the defensive tradition in Seattle still carrying on while also having some crazy offensive weapons still in DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, all those guys. I do think the Rams are going to be really good this year. I mean, they made it the playoffs last year and nobody really took them seriously. And then this year they've only gotten better. I know that they lost Aaron Donald, but I think they understand the magnitude of that loss. And I think that's half the battle is understanding how you need to make up for that. And they're doing so by a better defensive rotation, or at least trying to get a little bit more creative along that defensive line. And then I mean, provided everybody's healthy, I have all the faith in the world in McVay to make that offense into something. And they have so many good pieces. I mean, Puka Nacua coming on with Cooper Kupp, Matt Stafford, who I think people are finally starting to give flowers to. Like, oh yeah, Matt Stafford is like top 5 quarterback, isn't he? And you're like, yeah, he's been a top 5 quarterback, but that's fine.
Yeah, everyone discounted it for end of game yards when they were tossing it up to Megatron for years, and it's a little different than that in LA now, which is I think good that he's finally getting the plaudits that he needs. But I guess Matt, we've talked a bunch about Puka, who Carmen you just brought up, but does the defense in LA hold up? Not a ton of change in San Francisco, so not a huge staffing change, not a huge player change. Are the 49ers still the top of the West for you?
Yeah, I feel like if you go to the Super Bowl and you don't change much, you're probably going to be a favorite there. As Shane said, I'm our primarily offensive guy, but we'll happily talk about the 49ers defense. To think what they had last year, Fred Warner, obviously one of the best players in football, but they were really able to get after the quarterback. I expect Nick Bosa to have another really good season. And then I think their secondary is pretty, I don't know if slept on is the right word, but just so much focus is put on Fred Warner and Nick Bosa that you get guys like Talanoa Hufanga, Amador Lenore, Travis Ward. Like, they have some really good players in the back end as well. So I do think, and that we haven't even talked about offensively. We brought up the Josh Dobbs effect. He's on the 49ers this year. So maybe that's going to be the little thing that'll take him over the top and let him, win the Super Bowl. But I do think they're the 49ers to me are still the heavy favorites there.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, let's jump to the AFC really quickly. And Shane, I want to start with you in the East. Is this Josh Allen's division to win? What's going to happen down in Miami? What are we dealing with here? Are the Patriots going to see a comeback? What's your take?
I don't actually think it's Josh Allen's division to win. I think the contract situations and salary cap situations that Buffalo's been dealing with have really hurt the depth of that team. So I would not be surprised to see them take a step back. You've seen the Dolphins last year make a step forward. So I could very easily see them, I guess, take the division from the Bills. The other two teams I'm not as high on, but yeah, I think it's the Dolphins and Bills for me.
Dolphins and Bills the whole way. Carmen, does Aaron get to play more than 5 minutes this season? What's going on in New Jersey?
I mean, it's wild because it really is Super Bowl or bust for the New York Jets. And I don't think that's realistic necessarily. They do have an incredibly talented team. And theoretically, with a future Hall of Famer at quarterback, you should have a significant chance. I just don't trust that it's going to go well just because of the friction that we've seen between the head coach and the quarterback and between the quarterback and his receivers. And the fact that Aaron didn't play any of the preseason. It's going to be really interesting to see how that all unfolds, because if it's anything less than a legitimate playoff run, it's not even just make up the playoffs. You gave up too much for Rodgers. You've invested too much in this year's roster. If it's not winning playoff games, I think that the Jets are cleaning house between Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, like everybody's gone. And Rodgers even said as much earlier in minicamp, or prior to minicamp, because he missed minicamp.
So he wasn't at minicamp as was called up by his own receivers.
No, in OTAs though, he was like, I'm not shying away from the fact that everything rides on my shoulders, and it does. He's right, and not that I ever want to really tell anybody that Aaron Rodgers is right after covering him, but I do think that the Bills are taking a giant step back, but not for necessarily the offensive pieces that they lost, like Stephon Diggs. That Matt Milano injury really, really crushed me for them. I do think that Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. If top two, three guy, and he's capable of elevating that receiving core around him, despite the fact that they don't have any flashy names. I think Keon Coleman he's extremely likable. I hope that translates to his play on the field. But that defense now, I don't think it works without Matt Milano at the center of it all. I'm worried about that secondary. They're extraordinarily thin. Right now, DeMar Hamlin is one of their starting safeties. And for as much as he went through, I think we would all agree he was not a starter like prior to any of this, and probably still isn't. Not to mention you have like rookies that are and late round rookies that are backing him up. So that's all very concerning. The Dolphins, again, on paper look great. Can they shed the they can't play in cold weather narrative? I think it's the silliest thing because players come from all over and they played at colleges and all that other stuff. I don't know. They need to get over that narrative.
But can the Bills play in cold weather? They're the cold weather team. They don't have the offense for it.
Yeah, it's a fair question. Certainly in snow. I mean, although I do think James Cook is going to be very, very good for that offense. So, if it comes to a snow game, I know the Bills can still run the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's stay in the snow, and Shane, we'll stay with you in your hometown team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Are we looking at a yet again another north of 500 season for the Pittsburgh Steelers, or are we finally going to see Tomlin, drop below 500?
Yeah, honestly, I've been waiting this whole podcast just to get here so I can talk about the Steelers.
Carmen, we can go on mute and grab a cup of coffee for a minute. I'll see you in the break room.
I'm of two minds with the Steelers because on one hand, I really like a lot of the things they're doing. I really like Omar Khan. I really like getting Andy Weidl from the Eagles to run the personnel. I love a lot of the draft picks they've made. They've really restocked the trenches on both sides. I think the Claypool trade that turned into Joey Porter Jr. was a great trade. So I love a lot of the things they're doing. And even at quarterback, I mean, the future of the team is not on the roster currently, I don't think, but they're paying Fields and Wilson kicker money essentially. So it's kind of a free roll. So I love a lot of what they've done personnel-wise with this team. But at the end of the day, I don't know if this season's really going to look that much different from the previous ones. I envision them kind of being the same. They're going to be right there around 500 fighting for a wild card.
Okay. So what you're saying is we need to get James Harrison back on the field, playing across from TJ Watt. Is that the game?
He was at training camp, and he is the scariest human being alive. I think he can still play.
Carmen, did you see that he was just walking around in a blank black T-shirt with the angriest glare I've ever seen?
Yeah. It's funny because I also hear, like, as a human being, he's very pleasant.
Oh, lovely!
Like,
I've heard. Yeah.
Yes, like he's a lovely person. I don't think I've met him, but it's interesting to me because the Steelers have obviously insulated against their quarterback play, and I think the good news is that you're not any worse off with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as you were with Mason Rudolph, Mitch Trubisky, and Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett not the answer. Interesting.
But the bad news is you're not any better off.
Yep.
Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky. I don't know. I mean, neither of these two quarterbacks went out and won the job in preseason. I am of the volition, though, that there really wasn't ever a competition to begin with, and that Russell Wilson will be the starter.
Yep,
and he will be the starter until he starts making errors that cost the defense, because your bread and butter is the defensive side of the ball, and that hasn't changed in forever in Pittsburgh. And if you can get a guy in there that's just not going to turn the ball over, not going to sustain a lot of sacks, be able to at least have some drives that go the distance on offense, I mean, you're only going to have to ask your quarterback to really score like 21 points, 22 points, and you should be okay with this defense. So until if Russell Wilson is benched, it will be because of the fact that he is no longer taking care of the football and he is putting the defense in bad situations. Because that's what we saw in Chicago with Justin Fields was, I mean, 2 years ago, he led the league in sacks with 55 of them. He took 55 sacks. And I get that his offensive line wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
On top of the fact that he had 12 fumbles that year, he had 10 fumbles last year. Now Russell Wilson also had 10 fumbles last year. He took 45 sacks last year in Denver. But we have historically seen Russell Wilson be able to take care of the football and get himself out of some situations. So I'm really hoping that right, like, just at least keeps the ship steady, because I think that Shane's right. I don't think that the future under center is on the roster currently. And if both of these guys are 1-year rentals at the cheap price that they're at, cool. Just lean on your defense and you'll get to a little bit above 500 and not much more than that.
I feel like the Steelers are very memeable this year. You've got, the quarterback room, just Spider-Man pointing at himself. You've got the defense and what's going on with Defensive Player of the Year getting robbed out of TJ's hands last year. So we got a number of pieces that we can go after. So Carmen, are you saying that it's going to come down to Ravens Bengals? Is this where it's going to live? Is Joe with his Eminem haircut gonna win the division? What's going on?
Oh no, it's frosted tips now. It's
frosted tips.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I got to see him for Bears Bengals joint practices just what was that, like a week and a half ago?
See, those of us that are hairless, we strive to have one of these styles, not multiples in the summer.
No, it started to grow out. He's now full on boy band, and we love it for Joe. He can pull off any look. It was. Honestly, this is so important. This year is so important for Joe Burrow because we regularly talk about him as a top 5 quarterback. If he gets injured again, and I realize that's not entirely in his control, but if he gets injured again, I don't think we can any longer talk about him as an automatic top 5 quarterback, because part of the best ability, what is the coaching saying?
The greatest ability is availability.
Is availability, right?
Yep.
So
can't make the club in the tub, Carmen.
Yeah, well, there you go. So you guys would know much more about coaching sayings, I guess, than I would. But at the same time, as much as I love watching Joe Burrow play, and I think that he is the top 5 quarterback in my heart of hearts, he needs to stay on the field this year. If he does that, though, I mean, we talk a lot about Jamar Chase. He is playing for his next contract. I think that the Bengals would be smart to get it done now, because the price is only going to go up. But if it doesn't get done now, that means that Jamar Chase knows that this is the year to really, really prove how much money he's worth, and that he's worth top of the market money. On top of the fact that, you have T. Higgins playing on a tag, and he's likely playing for his next team this year. But that's motivation in and of itself. And T. Higgins is extraordinarily important to Joe Burrow as, if not as much as Jamar Chase is. If you look at the numbers and you look at some of the stats, that'll back it up between just the completion percentage between Joe Burrow and T. Higgins. T. Higgins is really important to pushing the ball down the field for the Bengals. I think that he had like a top 10. Those two had a top 10 like air yards per attempt average. There's so much that T. Higgins brings, and then you add on Jamar, and then you add on hopefully their backfield still being. Joe Mixon is no longer there.
Yep.
Hopefully it's still viable. And yeah, the Bengals are going to be a hard out. The Ravens, what do you say about the league MVP, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm such a believer in Lamar, and I'm a believer because there's not a lot of answers for the things that he can do.
Yeah.
And I think with Todd Monken and now with Derrick Henry in Todd Monken's system with Lamar Jackson, it's just scary. Like defenses are not built to defend this anymore. Nope. Like these two hard-nosed runners, and one of those runners is your quarterback. Like it's going to be scary if you utilize him correctly. And him being Derrick Henry. So I'm so excited to see this Ravens offense this year.
I think the Ravens offense with Derrick Henry, somebody who's actually 6'3", 245.
Talk about a scary man.
Exactly. a real 6'3", 245. Put him in their black uniforms in the cold with visors on, and that's pure. That is pure late fall football. That's what I need.
It's so wonderful.
And I do not want to ignore them. Presumably it's not the Browns' year.
I don't think so. I just don't think that Deshaun Watson is going to return to any sort of form or like be half of what he was. And part of me, if I'm being completely honest, is kind of glad about that. Because I don't think that the Browns should be rewarded for keeping someone like him on their roster, and especially giving him that guaranteed money. But I do feel bad for a lot of the other players on the Browns, because they have a ton of good players. I love Amari Cooper. I love their defense. Myles Garrett is one of my favorite players in the league right now. And that defense is absolutely suffocating. And they are capable of winning you some games. How far beyond the regular season that'll take you, though, that's the question, especially, again, when you're in a division that has the Bengals, that has the Ravens. Just getting out of your division is going to be hard.
Yeah, for sure. Before we move divisions, Shane, I'm going to give you one chance. Do you want to sing Here We Go? Pittsburgh's going to the Super Bowl, or what are we doing?
No, I'll save the audience that travesty.
All right. If we get late in the season and the record shows it, we'll give you a 5-minute segment to tell me that I was wrong. Let's jump to the South. I think you both mentioned the Texans, and I think we have to start with the Texans, and then of course the Colts. But let's start in Houston. Carmen, is Houston going to continue to perform at the level that they did at the end of last year?
I have to think so, given that the offseason additions they had this year. I mean, they looked at last year and they didn't stand pat. They went out and they got Stephon Diggs, and they added some experience to their receiver core, which was already a good receiver core, by the way. And you have CJ Stroud. He's only going to get better with experience and with a guy that he can rely on. On top of that, you got Danielle Hunter now on defense. I mean, really.
Can't complain there.
Another guy that was, really overlooked when it came to the defensive awards last season. He was an absolute monster for the Vikings, and I think he's going to be an absolute monster in DeMeco Ryans' defense. So I'm super excited to see what the Texans can do, but I have no doubt in my mind that they are going to continue the momentum from last year. It's just a matter of how much the rest of the division is going to lift up with them. I'm not a huge believer in the Jags. It's not that I don't think Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback. I think he is. And I think he's still got more in the tank, and he's got more to develop. I don't trust their receiver core there. I don't trust the defense, who is under a new defensive coordinator now. I think that Mike Caldwell kind of got played the scapegoat last year. And this is Doug Peterson trying to hold on to his job. I think Doug Peterson is a good coach. I don't know. It's just the vibes are off. The vibes are off with the Jags. I do, however, think that the Colts are ascending, and I don't think the Titans are going to be completely atrocious. this year.
Big changes in Tennessee, though.
Big changes, and that's the thing is I trust offensive line coaches. So why would I not?
As we all should.
So I trust that a little bit more. I don't know that at least there's going to be improvement, or they're going to start being on the right track. I don't know if that gets them out of the basement of the division. But I think that we're going to see some tangible improvement from them too. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Colts can do and who Anthony Richardson actually is, because you're right. I'm not sold on him by any stretch of the imagination, but if he works out to be who they think he is, this is going to be a really formidable team that I think could make a playoff push.
Yeah. Well, they play indoors, so Shane automatically discounts what the Colts can do. Shane, you're not a huge Anthony Richardson fan. Is the South all Texans for you all day?
Yeah, I think it is all Texans, but I really want to watch Anthony Richardson this year because I think he's such an interesting test case for where we're at with player development. There was, that belief before Josh Allen came in the league that, accuracy was something you can't really improve on from college to the pros. We've seen that change a little bit in some people's minds because Josh Allen broke that, but has the pendulum swung too far into what is capable with, developing players, and especially coming from a baseball background, you see with what some of these more advanced teams can do with pitchers and some of the, the physical metrics they get into there. So I'm skeptical of Anthony Richardson, but I will be watching him this year just to see, what that player development really looks like.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and if we get any surprise concerts from Jim Irsay as well along the way. Last, but of course not least, the home of our champions from last year, the AFC West. What should we expect? Anything different? Are the Broncos going to step up? With a new quarterback. What are we anticipating? Are the Chargers going to get a bounce under Harbaugh? Carmen, what's going on in the West?
I mean, this has to work out for Sean Payton. I think that this is going to affect his legacy. He cost the team a great expense by getting rid of Russell Wilson. I mean, you're paying him $53 million to go away. Yes. I would just like to say that I also do not play for the Broncos, so you could also give me $53 million if that was.
Let me find that. I'm sure we can find that in one of the owners' couches. It's got to be there.
Right, it's got to be there. It's chump change, right? Yeah. But that does handicap the organization when it comes to in a salary cap league. That handicaps the organization. So not only that, but then you also spent a top 12 pick on a guy that many thought was a day 2 pick in Bo Nix. Bo Nix played a lot of football in college that can either work for and against him or against him. And I think that we're going to find out just if it does or not. If once the real bullets start flying, if he is able to transition pretty easily because of his experience, or he's having to unlearn some behaviors that he kind of fell back on because he played a lot of, out of structure stuff in college where I'm like, all right, that's not necessarily going to fly in the NFL.
Yep.
We also haven't seen him kind of air it out at all in the preseason, which is very typical of a Sean Payton offense. I get that he was going to dink and dunk you till the cows come home, and it works. If it all runs smoothly, it works. So Sean Payton is trying to mold Bo Nix into his type of quarterback. He's already comparing him to Drew Brees every chance he gets. And I'm like, all right, can we not put that on the kid?
Yeah.
But it has to work. It really does, because there's too much, they've trusted Sean Payton every step of the way at this point. The Raiders are just.
You don't believe in Gardner?
I love Gardner Minshew.
Gardner's such a boy.
Personality. But come on, not even Devontae Adams believes in Gardner Minshew.
Yep, no, that's fair.
And when you're clearly your number one receiver is not bought into what you're doing organizationally, that's never a good sign. I feel like Max Crosby's talent is being wasted in Las Vegas too. Get him on a real contending team and watch him just wreak havoc. It's still the Chiefs division. The Chargers. I think that Jim Harbaugh is going to do well, but that roster needs so much work still. Sure. And I don't think that we can expect a huge amount of success when they are still in the midst of an actual rebuild. It sucks because Justin Herbert, you're just wasting money, paying this guy who's an extremely talented quarterback, don't get me wrong, but you're wasting him on a team that's not contending, and especially when you share a division with the Chiefs, who I am not going to bet against. I realize that a 3-peat's never been done before, but if anybody can do it, it's going to be the GD Chiefs. Yeah. And I'm not going to say otherwise until I'm proven wrong. I'd rather be wrong about the Chiefs than like take the heat for saying no, they're not going to do it this year.
Yeah. Shane, on that one, I heard you jump it in.
Yeah, I was going to say the one interesting thing I do think there is about the Raiders is they will be a fascinating test case for personnel usage this year with their tight ends, having drafted Bowers to go to Michael Mayer, two tight ends that get involved in the pass game. So what does their personnel usage look like? What does their pass game look like with two receiving tight ends?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously that's Luke Getsy, then their new offensive coordinator who came from Chicago, but he came from Green Bay. And who else likes to use tight ends? Matt LaFleur.
Mm-hmm.
So he was under Matt LaFleur in Green Bay. He learned, he's a big proponent of 12 personnel, 13 personnel even. But when they're both pass catching tight ends, you kind of take away the mystery as to what they're about to do. I feel like those personnel sets are meant for guys that you can exploit mismatches and do all this crazy stuff because defenses don't know if these tight ends are just acting as blockers or if they're releasing into routes or if they're chipping and then releasing into routes. When you put two guys on the field that are going to catch the ball, it kind of gets rid of some of the mystery. And I think that's what we saw in Chicago. The overall system just didn't work with Justin Fields, and it didn't really work in Chicago with their personnel. So now that the Raiders have that personnel, maybe it'll look a little bit better, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm just cautious.
Carmen, are you saying that the Raiders should bring us the wing tee? We've got two tight ends on the field at all times. We can run some motion. Shane pointed out last week, we can start digging into the number of teams that are using interesting motions. Can we bring the wing tee back to the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Brock Bowers would be the guy to do it with, wouldn't he?
It'd be great. Can you imagine the Raiders running some kind of triple option out of the backfield? God. It would just bring joy to every boomer's heart.
It would. It's true. And probably Mark Davis's. So.
Well, that's true. I think an awesome chance to review each of the divisions. Carmen, I'm going to hit you with it. Give me your division champs, your conference champs, your Super Bowl champs. Give me now. I got to. All right.
Okay. I guess we'll start at the NFC. The North, I'm going to go with the Lions still, although I think the Packers are going to be right there. The South is still going to be the Bucks. The East is going to be the Eagles. The West is going to be the Niners. AFC North is going to be the Ravens. AFC South is going to be the Texans. AFC East is going to be the Bills still. And I'll just throw a wrench in there. I was going to say Dolphins. And the AFC West will be the Chiefs. And then Super Bowl, I'm going to go with Lions because I would love to see it, and Chiefs. And I still think the Chiefs win, but I want to see the Lions.
I would love to see Dan Campbell in the Super Bowl.
It was so close last year. They were one half away from it. We were one half away from that. And honestly, like Dan Campbell already, like he pokes his guys every chance he gets. Like, remember what that felt like last year? Remember what that felt like last year? Remember how close we were? Remember how we didn't get there? Like, he is using that as motivation the entire season. The Lions are going to come back out with a vengeance. Mark my words.
We did not get to talk about him when we talked about the NFC North, but I know he gets lots of love. I want to give him even more love. Dan Campbell is an incredible coach, an incredible motivator, an incredible leader of football players. I don't know if he's the right leader for, let's say that the Lyric Opera here in Chicago, but he's an incredible leader of football players.
I love him. I love Kevin O'Connell too. I think that those two are some of the best coaches that we have in this league. And I don't think either of them gets the shine that they deserve. It's so funny because no one took Dan Campbell seriously when he talked about like biting off kneecaps and all, like his introductory press conference was just insane. You're like, oh my God, football guy. But what you don't realize is how much that motivates these players and how much he cares about his players. And also he's a really emotional guy. He does not shy away from his emotions, which kind of contrasts with the masculinity that we're kind of used to in this league. And even the masculinity that we associate with Dan Campbell. Like, he is this rough and tumble football guy, but he's cried at the podium before. And it's like, and especially God, that locker room after they lost the NFC Championship, he's going around, he's hugging his guys, tears are in his eyes. I mean, how could you not just love him?
Yeah. I think he's a great example of, I think, today's modern NFL and football player overall. Complex creatures around. Shane, I'll pivot to you. Do you disagree with Carmen, our expert? And if you do, are you allowed back on the show?
I actually agree in one respect. So I'll hit you with these quick. So I have Eagles, Lions, Falcons, 49ers, Dolphins, Ravens, Texans, Chiefs as my division winners. And then I have, as much as it hurts me to say, I have the Ravens over the Lions in the Super Bowl.
Oh. I had Ravens Lions Super Bowl last year and it didn't work out for me. And so I was like, I'm not going to bet on the Chiefs. I'm not going to bet against the Chiefs. But like, I would be so stoked if it was Ravens Lions.
That would be I think, an incredible Super Bowl, an incredible kind of stylistic opposition on the field would be very, very cool.
All the football nerds would be happy. Football nerds.
Yeah, you were talking Shane and Matt's and my language on this one, and I know Carmen, deep down in your heart, you're a football nerd and you love the data anyway. We didn't even get to talk about one major coaching change. Obviously, this is the first year in a while that Eric Bieniemy hasn't been in the NFL. Down in LA at UCLA. I think we could talk more college football later like we did last week, but building a really interesting staff down at UCLA and Bieniemy not being in the league this year is a big change for me.
It is going to be very interesting. Although, I mean, I think he was always kind of overshadowed in Kansas City, given the fact that he was not a play caller and you have Andy Reid there kind of as the mastermind and the puppeteer behind everything there. Washington was just it was hard to get a gauge on who Eric Bieniemy was or anybody was when there was that dumpster fire going on behind the scenes with ownership and all that other stuff. So it's hard. I wish him the best. I hope he does well at UCLA.
Yeah, we will come back with, I think, a coverage on a couple of the teams that we didn't get a chance to really dive into, primarily the Washington Commanders, because there's a lot to cover there with ownership changes and major pieces coming in. A lot of, I don't know, my shoulders are all the way up in the air on this one as to where they finish up. I will pivot and finish up with the stat of the week. Carmen, you gave us a ton of good ones. Shane, stat of the week from your side.
Yeah, so sometimes, you like to look into some of the advanced metrics, all these new metrics that are coming out. But then other times there's a very basic stat that I think tells a really good story. And as I was playing around with our NFL data this week, I think I found one for last year. So I looked at, on offense, how often does a team face third down? What's their third down percent? And I'll just hit you with the bottom five and the top five teams, and you'll see if this tells a story. So the worst five: Panthers, Giants, Buccaneers, Steelers, Titans. The best
Panthers, Giants, Buccaneers, Steelers, Titans with the bottom five. Interesting. Okay.
Interesting that Steelers are on that list.
Interesting that the Bucks, who won their division, are at the bottom of that list.
Yeah.
Well, so the teams at the top that face the fewest third downs on offense: 49ers, Bills, Ravens, Lions, Chiefs. So I think that was interesting to me, seeing that, just the dichotomy of, okay, these are the good teams and these are not, and it's pretty clear.
I think in the Steelers and Bucks case, it's like their defensive schemes are very much like bend, don't break. Like they're going to give you between the 20s as much as you want, and then they clamp down in the red zone. And I think that would be, maybe that's inspiration for a future stat. Is like,
I think from that offensive perspective, it's
offensive perspective.
Yeah. Offense. Okay. So I'm with you, Carmen. I think it's a great point, because it solidifies the importance of the defense. But I think really, Shane, what you're telling me is it's better to just get a first down and second down. What you're telling me is it's the Happy Gilmore principle. Here's what we've arrived at. Why not just drive it into the hole off the tee? It's a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah.
Good offenses don't even face third down.
That's perfect.
Right. So okay, now that changes the way that I thought it was defense. Offensively, no, that still makes sense though, because the Bucs made it way harder on themselves than they should have. Like way harder. But that was that unimaginative run scheme that I was talking about. I'm very excited to see Liam Cohen take this over. So maybe they'll be out of that bottom five offensively.
But we will check in later on in the season. Carmen, thank you again for joining us. We have loved having you on. We can't wait to have you back. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week.